Hi Bio4 and welcome to part 3 of digestive system. We start out with the pharynx that we've already seen in respiratory. But remember it's a shared tube, so we talk about it again. And here we go down the pharynx, and from the pharynx now, instead of coming into the trachea, we're going down into the esophagus. So this is an interesting tube. It's a muscular tube. It's about 1 foot long, about 2 centimeters wide, which isn't very wide. Chew your food. And the upper walls are skeletal muscle. You do have control of the upper esophagus as you swallow, but the lower walls, no, are more smooth muscle. And they are controlled also by reflexes of the presence of food in them. So it's moved from the pharynx. It's going to move food from the pharynx to the stomach. Now, we do have a sphincter that is going to separate the esophagus from the stomach. That's the cardiac sphincter because it's in the cardiac region, and we've done this in lab already, so I think you're familiar with that. And there I've circled it again for you. That's the cardiac sphincter. So we have 2 sphincters here. That is going to come up next, but the second sphincter is here. So when food is entering, you don't want it to go back again, back up into the esophagus, and you also don't want it to go into the duodenum too early. So the sphincter is just a region of muscle here that's going to be able to contract, stopping that reflux here, especially when the pH is 2 of the stomach, and you don't want it to be harming the esophagus. And then here, food must be churned around, it must be broken down, and it can pass into the duodenum too quickly. So this closes up. So when that 2-year-old swallows the quarter or nickel or something that they shouldn't have swallowed, you're going to worry about 2 places. Did it get stuck here, or did it make it in the stomach? And then did it get stuck here, or is it going to come out the other end? So those 2 places are crucial as to what is going to make it through. So this one here, cardiac sphincter, this is your pyloric sphincter. This is more of a review for you. So esophagus coming in, the fundus of the stomach, the body, the greater curvature, the pylorus, or the pyloric sphincter here that I drew in. Lesser curvature with the lesser omentum and greater omentum. So I feel like I can really run through this because we've seen it in lab, but that's a good little review. And then behind it here is a spleen. This is just an enlarged greater and lesser omentum for you to see. This is this fabric here with fat on it that is on this curvature, the small curvature, as opposed to the greater omentum on the larger curvature of the stomach. Oh, and this is a really nice picture here, the pyloric sphincter. So here you can see how circular muscle here is going to be able to close this off, right? So it's musculature there, circular muscle that can just contract and close that up. Pyloric sphincter again. This is a nice slide because it shows you, given that one of the functions of the stomach is to really mix that food well as it sits in the stomach, then it makes sense to have very good muscles. And look at the muscle. Look at the direction. One is contracting in this direction, one is contracting in this direction, and then in the third layer. So by having those fibers in different directions, you're going to be able to really churn that organ around and mix food inside it. Now, we've talked about the muscle, or we've talked as I come up to this muscularis, and then we are coming up to the submucosa and the mucosa. And look at how different the stomach wall is here. So in that mucosa here, in this layer of the mucosa, there are these entryways. Do you notice these gastric pits here? Sort of little valleys that form pits. So that's a gastric pit. If you can follow it down in the diagram, you'd see it coming down all the way like this. They're deep. You have a pit that comes down. And then within those pits, you have all these gastric glands. And here they've colored them in blue and in red. And I'm going to enlarge that for you. For now, I want you to have this view that shows the pit and how those gastric glands are going to be at the base of this big cave here. Okay, there it is. There's the enlargement. The pit, seen from the top, looks like a snake eye here, that it's an entryway down. There's that entryway, there's that pit. And as you come down, we have these different cells that are lining that pit. So there are some mucous cells, another cell called a parietal cell, more mucous cells, in pink the chief cells, and then G cells. So all these different varieties of cells with different functions that are then inside these pits. Look, I'm going to go back again for you to see. This is the inside, the mucosa of your stomach wall. Okay, full of these entryways. Okay, so what are they? Well, the G cells, enteroendocrine cells, they secrete gastrin. Okay, gastrin, change my pen color. And gastrin is a hormone that's going to stimulate cells within that area to secrete acid. So you know that the pH of your stomach is about a pH of 2. We need that stimulation of that secretion of acid. So these G cells are going to secrete a molecule that stimulates a different cell. Which cell? The parietal cell, to secrete hydrochloric acid. So in the absence of that hydrochloric acid, the enzymes that are in the stomach do not function. They do not function outside of that pH of 2. So you need to bring that pH down, and then those digestive enzymes will work. This is an easy experiment to do in a lab. You can put a piece of meat in a test tube with some of these enzymes at pH 5 or 6 or 7, and nothing happens. And you can put that same little piece of meat with those enzymes at a pH of 2, and it will dissolve. So really nice to do that in the lab. What else? What are the cells? G cells, these cells, what else they do is they secrete serotonin, which is going to stimulate motility of the stomach, secrete histamine, which stimulates further hydrochloric secretion, and also somatostatin. So if it's a statin, it means it stops something. What does it stop? It inhibits gastric secretion and slows down digestion. So depending on what phase of digestion you're in, these G cells are going to be able to be releasing these different molecules. More glands, mucous cells, that's straightforward, secretes mucus, you know those. And chief cells. Who are the chief cells? Chief cells secrete something called pepsinogen. And pepsinogen is kind of like the raw material to making another very important molecule, which is pepsin. So we need pepsin because pepsin is going to digest protein. But before we make pepsin, we need the raw material. The raw material is pepsinogen, and it's released, it's secreted by these chief cells that line these pits. The chief cells also are going to secrete gastric lipase, another enzyme. Lip, meaning they're going to digest fat. So these chief cells are very important. They're digesting protein, they're digesting fat. Okay, so let's look at them again. And I've kind of tried to summarize them in this slide. So let's look. Here's the pit, right? And there we have mucous cells. Okay, that's easy. I'm going to secrete mucus. What else? A parietal cell that's going to do what? secrete hydrochloric acid. And on this side, so what? Well, it makes the enzymes work. Okay, let's come down. Now we have these light pink ones. These are chief cells. What do? They secrete pepsinogen, right? Precursor to pepsin. And what's that going to do? Digest protein. And then G cells secreting gastrin, stimulating those parietal cells. These parietal cells to secrete hydrochloric acid. Okay, let's stop it there. There's a lot of information on this. These are important. What is the cell and what does it do? Okay, thanks for listening, guys.